Welcome to Cora's Cottage, where things are homegrown and handmade. I started my journey in town on a small city lot where I grew a garden and preserved most of what I grew. While I was in town, I continued to learn kitchen and other homemaking skills. However, recently, my husband and I have had the opportunity to move out into the country. This means we have more space, and I will be expanding my garden and preservation skills this summer. I want to continue to expand my homesteading and homemaking skills as well. Follow along with me on this journey as I share what I learn. I've wanted to make a crib skirt for my daughter's crib for a while now, but just haven't been able to find the right fabric. Then I came across these old curtains and decided they would be perfect to make a crib skirt. To start, I had to go ahead and disassemble the curtains by ripping out the seams to remove the back panel that was a lining and to remove the tab tops that were used to hang the curtains. Once I had that done and I had my raw piece of fabric, it was time to go ahead and cut it down to size. I ended up cutting it to be about 22 inches, though only 17 of that would actually be crib skirt. Then I went ahead and put hems back in. I used a 1/4 inch hem with a single fold. I wasn't too worried about these coming unraveled, and so a single fold was more than enough, and I was already stretching how much fabric I had to work with. Once all of the hems were pinned in place, it was time to go ahead and stitch them down. I used a 1/4 inch seam allowance and made sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end to hold that stitch in place so it wouldn't come unraveled. Now that all my hems were in place, it was time to go ahead and add some gathering to give the final crib skirt a nice ruffled look when it was finished. To do this, I used a gather foot because I had one, but you can certainly do this with just a regular foot. I'll link a video in the description of a gal that explains how to do it with both methods. When gathering, you do not want to backstitch at the beginning or the end, and you want to leave plenty of thread so that you can adjust how gathered your fabric is. Once I had it done, I went ahead and lined it up with my panel that was going to be my base piece, and it happened to be just the perfect length, so thankfully I didn't have to mess with my gathers. Then it was time to go ahead and measure from the base piece to what would be the floor and make sure that it was even all the way across. I wanted this measurement to be 17 inches. Once I had that, I went ahead and put in some anchor pins before pinning the entire panel all the way across so that I could stitch this piece into place. I wanted to make sure that I had plenty of pins in place to keep the fabric from slipping so that my gathers stayed even all the way across even as I stitched this panel into place. Then it was time to attach my skirt piece to my base piece. I did this with just a single stitch, making sure that my gathers stayed in place and didn't slide so that my gathers stayed even across the piece. With the long panel attached to the base piece, it was time to go ahead and prepare the short panel. I went ahead and pinned 1/4 inch hems into place. With my hems pinned into place, it was time to go ahead and stitch them down. I used a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around to put my single fold hems in. I was sure to backstitch at both the beginning and the end. Then it was time to go ahead and add my gathers to this short panel. I again used my gather foot, making sure that I did not backstitch at the beginning or the end and that I left plenty of tails so that I could adjust my gather to the length that I needed. I again got lucky and the gather was almost perfect, so I went ahead and measured again to 17 inches from the base panel to the floor and pinned that in place. I used a couple of anchor pins before adding all of my final pins to hold it in place. I again wanted to make sure that I had plenty of pins so that my fabric wouldn't move as I was sewing because I want my gather to lay even across the whole piece. With the short panel pinned in place, it was time to go ahead and attach it to my base piece. I again used a single stitch and made sure to backstitch at both the beginning and the end to keep it from unraveling. Up next was the install, so I started by removing the crib mattress, and then I went ahead and put the crib skirt in and got it laid roughly out where I wanted before feeding it through. This part was a little tricky because this opening is very tight, but I managed to get it wiggled through and then do some adjustments to get it roughly where I wanted before I went ahead and added the crib mattress back in. Once I had the crib mattress back in, I did some final adjustments before I went ahead and pinned the sides together so that there wasn't a gaping hole. Now, in an ideal world, I would have stitched this, but that would have required me to take almost the entire crib apart, and I really didn't want to have to take the crib apart to put it back together just to put this crib skirt in. So pins will work for now, and I will just make sure that I go ahead and get these two panels stitched together next time that we have the crib apart. My daughter loves puffs, but I don't love the ingredients that can be found in most of the store-bought varieties. You can get cleaner options, but they are very expensive and very hard to find in the area that we live in. So I've come up with a framework recipe that I can swap out different flavors without too much hassle, and I know exactly what the ingredients are. Today I'm doing a restock with peanut butter banana and avocado. I love this recipe because of how versatile it is. It's great if you don't have a particular ingredient on hand or for a picky toddler. For example, I like to use oats and grind it into my own flour, but this isn't necessary and there are lots of other options. The same is true of the flavors. Some of our favorites are banana, pumpkin, apple, peanut butter, and avocado, but the options are truly endless if you have a picky toddler. The limited number of ingredients is also great. It takes a flour of some sort. In this example, I'm using oats that I'll grind into my own flour, egg, banana, peanut butter, and baking powder. Sometimes if a batter is too thick, it might be necessary to add a little bit of water, but that isn't always the case. I did need to add some with this because my banana wasn't as ripe as it should have been. Once I had my batter all blended together, it was time to line my baking sheet with parchment paper before I transferred my batter into a Ziploc bag to pipe it onto the tray in dime-sized drops. You could also use a pastry bag for this, but I didn't have any pastry bags, and honestly, I find Ziploc bags to be just as easy for the cleanup. I squeeze out as much as I can, and then what's left, I just toss in the trash, and I don't have to worry about it. Dropping the puffs onto the cookie sheet is one of the most tedious parts of this recipe. It does take quite a bit of time, but I find it to be worth it. I have tried a couple other methods where I run strips that I'll cut apart later, but they just don't bake the same, and I find that they're so much better when I bake them as individual puffs. So I take the time to put them into my piping bag and drop individual dime-sized puffs onto the tray. As you can see, you can put them pretty close, but you do want to try to keep them from touching. Puffs that touch tend to bake a little funny and have to be broken apart. You can fit quite a few puffs onto a single tray, and of course this will vary depending on the size of your tray, but I can't quite fit all of them onto mine. So usually what I will do is I will either make a second tray that also has a second flavor, or I will put any leftovers into the fridge until the first batch is finished baking. This doesn't seem to make any difference as long as I still bake them the same day. With the peanut butter banana all piped out and onto trays, it's time to go ahead and make my second flavor. This second flavor is going to be avocado. This time I remembered to blend my oats before I added the rest of my ingredients, which is the preferred way to do this. So if you're using oats, do try to remember to blend your oat flour first before adding the rest of your ingredients. Once I have the oat flour blended, it's time to go ahead and add my baking powder, my avocado, and an egg. I will say I added my avocado and he wasn't quite ripe enough, so again, I had to add some water to this recipe, but if your avocado is as ripe as it should be, you shouldn't need to add any water to make this recipe work. So then I just went ahead and blended this up until it was smooth, adding water until I got it to the consistency that I wanted. It should be like a thick cake batter. Then into our piping bag or Ziploc bag, and we are ready to go ahead and pipe it onto our baking sheets. Again, this part is tedious, but it's well worth it in my opinion. Like I mentioned previously, the flavor options are truly endless, but some more ideas include pear, peach, blueberry, raspberry, strawberry, mango, carrot, spinach, sweet potato, and beet. And you could do different variations of all of these. Just pick whatever works for your family's taste and preferences. The biggest thing that I've noticed of all the flavors that I've tried thus far is that consistency is what matters, not the flavor. You want that nice, pureed consistency, and aside from that, it doesn't really matter. You can add in whatever fruit or veggie or nut butter that you want. Another way to mix it up and get some more flavors is to add some different spices, such as cinnamon, pumpkin spice, nutmeg, ginger, cumin, cloves, or cardamom. Now, some of the ones that are my favorite are to add cinnamon or pumpkin spice when we do pumpkin, or to add cumin when we do things like sweet potato. But the options again here are truly endless, and you can choose whatever fits your family's taste and preferences. Bake your puffs in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 to 15 minutes. You are looking for your puffs to get a little golden brown on the top. When they have reached this point, you can turn your oven off and allow them to cool in the oven for about 30 minutes. This step is important that you want them to cool in the oven. Once they have cooled, go ahead and remove them from your oven and transfer them into storage containers that are airtight. I like to use mason jars or repurposed glass jars like these ones.